Thanks, Johnny. Thanks, Pete, as well, for leading that time of worship. So I'm just going to pray to kick us off. So, yeah, let's just lift our eyes to God. Yeah, Father, I just thank you again just for the time that we can come together and to focus on you. And even as a community, also just recognize the things that affect each other as well. And we can be a visible element of that too. And I just pray as we come together now that your word will come through today, that wherever we're doing, wherever we're at, whatever our situation today is, that we can just open a space to hear your voice. And it will be your voice, not mine, that comes through. In your name, amen. Okay. This is different from Instagram. I can see you all. I don't know if I like that. You're all lovely, but it's extra pressure. So this morning, I've been asked to reflect a little bit on one of the topics that we've covered in the prayer course. So for those that aren't, I think it's mostly been done through home group. So if MD's not in a home group, I do apologise that you're missing out. The prayer course you can Google online. But on that note, I probably it's maybe safe to just give a call out to those that are maybe would like to be in a home group. I'm sure just this opportunity has arisen to kind of give a shout out to MD that would like to be part of that, or Connect group, I think we're calling them just now during COVID. But just an opportunity to have weekly fellowship. So send a message any which way in which you've connected to City Church, and please ask out for being part of a home group, and I'm sure somebody will get back to you, or the right person will get back to you. But it's been, I don't know how you guys have found it, the prayer course, for those that have been part of that. And perhaps there's things that have been maybe surprising, or things, thanks Tyler, things that have been encouraging, or things you've learned. And this is in an Instagram scenario. I was like, oh, well, everyone can type out maybe one of the weeks that have really struck out to them, but feel free to put it in chat or shout out any of the weeks that have stood out as being like, oh yeah, that was an excellent thing. Anybody? This is the opportunity for audience interaction, so that I can have a litmus test as to who's listening. Johnny's going for it. Thanks, Johnny. Anyone else? Technology is not proving to be Johnny's friend. I mean, it's all great. Pete says it's all great. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Pete. Contemplation. Yeah, that was an interesting week for us as well. Any advances on contemplation and everything? Listening. Unanswered prayer. Yes, that was a good one. Too much to contemplate at the moment, says Debbie. How Jesus took his friend with him to Garden of Gethsemane. Great. I'll shout any that come out, but oh, Jeff looks like he's typing. Wait for Jeff. Praying in increments. Yes, incremental prayer. That was petition, wasn't it? So lots of things that perhaps have hopefully how Jesus isn't grumpy over a lack of prayer skills. Pete's been learning a lot. It's great. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, there's been lots of things that hopefully we've learned in this week, or these weeks, things that perhaps that have been an encouragement as how we've been doing things, or maybe there's some things that we've just not really thought about before, and pausing time to spend time with the Lord, Beelin, as well. Great. So there's been lots of different, it's covered lots of ground. And what I've loved about the prayer course is how pertinent it is to our life. It's the most kind of applicable course I think I've ever really done in terms of discipleship as to growing in our relationship with God, which is one of the things why I love it. And so today, I'm going to pick on one of the elements that has stood out to me, which is listening. Bit of a cop-out because that's the most recent one as well. So either that's working out really well because it's all fresh in your memories, or that'll work really badly because it's worked really fresh in your memories. I don't know, but we'll see how we go on. So one of the things that's been great is just being able to focus on such a tangible outpouring of our relationship with God. You might remember the last time I actually spoke on prayer back in March, pre-lockdown, when we actually could gather. Believe it or not, that was just March. God's plan is for us to be in union with him. That's his ultimate goal for us, to be with him in his presence. Sin has prevented this, but Jesus has allowed us to bridge that gap, to have some union with him. And prayer is a tool that's been gifted us to provide that communication with God, to be able to relate to him and to hear him. So, and it still blows my mind when I think about what prayer actually is. It's a privilege of being able to relate on a one-to-one basis with God, with the creator of everything. And he's cared enough to create a mechanism of communication with us, of relationship. He's not a distant God that only speaks to some, but invites everyone to have that kind of opportunity to relate to him, which means he cares for us. He wants a relationship with us, to listen to us, to know what concerns us. We don't need an intermediary to stand between us, to take our prayers to him. He's opened up a direct channel for each and every one of us. That's how much he cares for you and for me. And I was thinking about prayer a little bit, and in many ways, it kind of is only just a glimpse of the full union that we can expect to enjoy one day. A bit of an amuse-bouche for the Bake Off fans. The full culinary delights have still to await us. But what a great taster he has gifted us still. And now, when I go into talking about listening, the caveat I want to make sure it's clear as well. I'm not saying that I'm raising this above any of the other attributes or areas we've touched upon. It's still important to be asking God for things, for petition, for intercession, and for lament. We can't expect us all to live in such a linear way, and relate in our position in such a linear way, but because they're all wonderful gifts that we've been given, and they've got their place and time. But today I'm hoping to recognize and celebrate the wonder of being able to listen to God's voice. So to do that, we're going to go to the scripture and look at Samuel. Surprisingly, I'm sure, not at all, for many. So if you have Samuel 3 to hand, we're going to look at that. I'm seeing some mad dashes for some Bibles, so I'll give you a second to catch up. Okay. So we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 3 and the first few verses of this passage. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare, there were not many visions. One night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am. You called me." But Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." So he went and lay down. Again the Lord called, "Samuel." And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am. You called me." "My son," Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. A third time the Lord called, "Samuel." And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am. You called me." Then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood there, calling as the other times, "Samuel, Samuel." Then Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." So the first thing that I'm going to draw out from this passage is that listening is not the same as hearing. That might seem obvious, or maybe not at all, but when we hear something, it's a passive action. We hear things all around us, but it doesn't mean that we're listening, nor does it mean that we've really heard or comprehended what was being communicated, or that we were searching to hear it either. Now, Samuel could hear a voice, but it didn't mean he was looking for it. It took 3 attempts before Eli and Samuel realized God was speaking to Samuel. "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." Now Samuel was listening. Very different change in position and posture at that point. And so how much do we seek to put ourselves into a position of listening, of active listening to God, which is different from just passively waiting for something to happen, I suppose. Here we learn and see that Samuel had to put himself into a space to actually say, "Speak, Lord, I am listening." And we can relate to this in between ourselves in many ways, I suppose. I mean, how frustrating is it when you're talking to someone and they're not listening? They're not giving you their undivided attention. Their eyes glaze over, or their attention's off to the shops. We sometimes think that we're good listeners, but how many times do you finish someone else's sentence before they're finished? How many times have you finished it correctly? Probably not that often in my experience, but didn't really demonstrate the value of you listening to that person. And that's maybe something to think about in how we listen to God. Not to jump to the conclusion or to the end of the sentence to move on. There's a fullness to that action. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who seems to be the flavor of the month at the minute, gets referenced here and everywhere, talks about listening as a ministry in his book, Life Together. Here, Bonhoeffer gives us something to avoid, a kind of listening with half an ear that presumes already to know what the other person is, an impatient, inattentive listening that is only waiting for a chance to speak. Listening shows that we value the speaker. And that's something that we can probably learn as a community of believers as much as it is as we can learn about how we relate to listening to God. And we see that thread in James as well. In James 1:19, he says, "Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger." How many times have you been told to think before you speak? But in how we relate to others, maybe it's definitely a case of making sure you listen before you speak as well. But listening is definitely one way of putting ourselves into the right posture with God. It doesn't start there alone. It's helpful to look at the earlier sections of the prayer course to see that, and that probably puts that rightfully in the right place too. Starting with adoration is quite a good clue to that. And if we don't, it's probably not recognizing where we ought to see God in our lives. It gives us the opportunity to align ourselves with God's agenda and not our own. And surely aligning ourselves with God's agenda, the creator of heaven and earth, is probably a good goal to have. And of course, this is again not to say that prayer and intercession aren't important aspects of prayer, because they are. We've been hearing that, and we're invited to take part in this as well. It's in fact a privilege that our Father wants to hear them. But if we're not careful, does it not just serve our own agenda if we're not providing the second part of the communication journey, an act? I missed the week in adoration, so I've only just caught up last week, and I was listening to it, and one of the things that stood out to me was that less than 30% of the Lord's Prayer is about our agenda, our prayers and petitions. The rest is adoration and acknowledging Him, which seems quite a good instruction for us to follow. Now, I'm going to read on as well, because the next point that I'd like to draw out is in the next few verses. So we're starting from verse 11. And the Lord said to Samuel, "See, I'm about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. At that time, I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke against his family, from beginning to end. For I told him that I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. His sons uttered blasphemies against God, and he failed to restrain them. Therefore I swore to the house of Eli, the guilt of Eli's house will never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering." Samuel laid down until morning, and then opened the doors of the house of the Lord. He was afraid to tell Eli the vision. But Eli called him and said, "Samuel, my son." Samuel answered, "Here I am." "What was it he said to you?" Eli asked. "Do not hide it from me. May God deal with you, be it ever so severely, if you hide from me anything he told you." So Samuel told him everything, hiding nothing from him. Then Eli said, "He is the Lord, let him do what is good in his eyes." The thing that struck me, because we often probably don't continue on when you hear discussions about Samuel. We often just listen to the first part of that passage of "Here I am, I'm listening," and then that's it. But actually, the kind of thing that I notice in this is that listening can be quite uncomfortable. We kind of find it a little bit awkward to kind of actually sometimes hear what God has to say, as illustrated here. I'm pretty sure Samuel was in a very awkward position when he heard this message from God. And it's pretty bad news that he's been asked to deliver. Granted, Eli takes it rather graciously. But I wonder if that's how often we choose not to seek a space to listen to God. And why is that? Are we worried that we won't like what we'll hear? Sometimes we might not even realize we're doing it, or that we're doing that, or that we're not doing it, as the case may be. So will it challenge the bits of our life that we've maybe not allowed God into, or because it will put us into a place of vulnerability? Prayer doesn't happen by accident. We both have to turn up to that conversation, awkward or not. What happens then when we don't listen? And I don't mean the times when we feel God feels silent, but when we're not putting ourselves into that place to listen. And we see that time and time again, of in the Old Testament especially, of God's people not listening. Jeremiah speaks of it often. Yet they do not listen or pay attention. They were stiff-necked and would not listen or respond to discipline. And in a different place as well. But if any nation does not listen, I will completely uproot and destroy it, declares the Lord. Some hefty words when we hear at that point what it means to not listen. And of course, Jeremiah is talking about the context of a wayward nation. But pragmatically speaking, in our relationship ourselves, we might recognize some of the symptoms of that posture of not listening to God, or finding a place to listen to him. It might not be pleasant, and when we don't, it's not, and we might find ourselves drifting rather rudderless if we're not finding the space to listen. I enjoyed Bonhoeffer's further warning in his book, and he's also talking, and here he's also talking about community and discipleship, but his application is quite rich in this context of listening to God as well. He who can no longer listen to his brother will soon be no longer listening to God either. He will be doing nothing but prattle in the presence of God too. This is the beginning of the death of the spiritual life. Anyone who thinks that his time is too valuable to spend keeping quiet will eventually have no time for God and his brother, but only for himself and for his own follies. And I feel like I am harshly presenting the sadness and poorness of not listening. But when we think about what riches that we receive, we listen in Ephesians, what God lavishly blesses upon us and gives us, and it's so wonderful when we do step in with His vision for our life. So it's surely a great benefit for us to do that. And I'm going to just close up now, probably, or lead towards closing, just reflecting on some more of the practical aspects of listening. Because the last thing I want to draw out is that listening requires action. And this is probably just kind of pragmatically speaking, how this lands. The reality of is that listening is an active word. So that requires an action from us. So I guess challenging us a little bit on how we can find that space to listen. And of course, that doesn't always just work in isolation either. All the other aspects of adoration and other parts of prayer build into this, and contemplation as well. They lead in and out of this as well. And you're a part of this conversation. You need to obviously ask. You're invited to ask and to seek, but you also have to put yourself into a place where you can listen as well. And even just the instruction from James, again in chapter 4, verse 8, come near to God and he will come near to you. There's a active positioning. You have to place yourselves to enjoy this opportunity. Like all aspects of discipleship, it can be a case of learning healthy habits to ensure we're stepping along with God, persevering. It doesn't always happen immediately. We can so often think of the idealistic prayer warrior and think that we can never be like them. But everyone is invited to pray. And things just to even be, if you're not even sure how to begin, if if maybe the past few weeks of the prayer course have just been well, I just don't feel like it's working, or I don't know if I'm doing it right, or anything like that. I mean, an easy place to start is just attending the church prayer meeting. You can listen to others pray and build up your own confidence. And now, don't get me wrong, that's a very intimidating space if you're a newbie to the old prayer situation. I know that as a student, it terrified me going to prayer meetings because the really super holy people were going to that meeting. But the more that I've kind of lived on and prayed more with people, the more I learned that they're just as normal as I am in that. And it's a very safe space. And at worst, I mean, it might feel intimidating and they're trying to catch you out, but they're not. They actually, at worst, they might try and encourage you and motivate you on. So definitely try that and think about doing that. I mean, even if it is not that, but just yourself finding space in your week, in your day to day. And I know that we kind of can quite often have that very pragmatic, that kind of very, oh yes, I know the right answer. You know, second to Jesus is yes, I need to find my quiet time space, and that's really good practice. But if you don't try it and if you don't build in that time, that's not going to change. Only you can change that. But again, another resource that might help motivate you in prayer, if this is, this few weeks has been your kind of starting into this area, there's an organization called There Is Hope who created the Try Praying evangelistic tool. They've got a 40-day prayer guide called Catching the Wave, which could be something that you could build in to your prayer life and help give you some structure if that's something you feel you're lacking in kind of praying. But I'm now just kind of, that's essentially where I felt God had led me in today, just to encourage you all to find a space to listen, to be still and know that I'm God. It can be something that is uncomfortable. I don't know how you guys felt earlier when you were standing on your doorsteps in your 2-minute silence and nobody else was there. There's nobody else in my street. How uncomfortable it can be to be still and in the business of life, just stop. We feel it's a vulnerable place. We all feel that. But some people it's more difficult than others. But the more that we try it, the more that we do it, the more opportunity we can have God to invite God to lead us in where we're going. Thank you.